With 2020 all wrapped up and thankfully no New Game Plus in sight, it's that time of the year again where we all get mad because somebody picked a game that we didn't like as Game of the Year. And I'm apparently a masochist because it's time for you to get mad at me for just that reason. While the rest of the world's been on fire this past 12 months, video games somehow turned out pretty okay actually, except for that one. You know the one. So to commemorate the 5th annual Game of the Year Awards here on the Golden Bolt, let's celebrate the best games that the worst year has had to offer. Let's begin with a game that just blew me away this year despite my rather tempered expectations going in, a title that takes home the Best Story Award. It's a renowned Japanese role-playing game, the 7th numbered entry in its historic franchise, in Japan at least. I'm talking about Yakuza 7, or Yakuza Like a Dragon as it's known here in the West. I talked a few months back about how Like a Dragon acts as both a soft reset for the franchise and a love letter to the classic Kiryu saga of Yakuza games, and how it's a love letter to the entire RPG genre for that matter, with its constant references to games like Final Fantasy, Pokemon, Dragon Quest, and more, so I won't retread that ground too much here. Instead, I just need to heap a whole ton of praise onto Yakuza 7's story, because where its hours-long intro felt unnecessary when I started, I had mistaken methodical for slow. I'm not exaggerating here. Every single seemingly insignificant moment at the start of the game, and throughout the rest of the adventure for that matter, comes back later on. Sure, sometimes a plot point or a twist might feel a bit contrived, but the game sticks the landing every single time regardless. I find that I always struggle to put a Yakuza game down once I start one, but Like a Dragon absorbed me like never before, using every trick and twist that RGG Studio had learned from Yakuza 0 through 6, everything that I had thought culminated in the near-perfect detective drama that was Judgment, and they found a way to take all of that and kick it up even more. This is, bar none, the best story that any Yakuza game has had in my opinion. I don't give this award lightly for 2020, considering the massive storytelling achievements that released in the past year, so if I somehow haven't convinced you yet that you need to try a Yakuza game, consider this my way of screaming it from the rooftops. Play Like a Dragon already, dammit. You will be hard-pressed to find a better time to dive into Yakuza, and if you give our new hero Ichiban's story a chance, I think many of you will come out on the other side agreeing with me. And yet, despite this being on the surface level a soft reboot, our introduction to Ichiban and his party, Like a Dragon finds a way to feel as much like the coda on the classic Yakuza series, arguably the Yakuza 6 that fans have wanted more than the Yakuza 6 that we actually got, providing some closure to fans of the original saga of games. This means that there could be a few moments where new players feel a little bit lost, but RGG Studio does a stellar job of keeping the references light if you don't need context, and easily explainable if you do need context. In a few ways, Yakuza 7 might have more moments that confuse series veterans than newcomers. However, Like a Dragon isn't my game of the year due to some rather significant shortcomings on the gameplay side of things. While this is a great first showing for RGG making an RPG, it's pretty clearly a first showing. It's still fine, I enjoy the job system and the game's Yakuza spin on the genre and its trappings, but let's just say that it absolutely shows at points that this game was converted from the classic Yakuza beat-em-up style into an RPG over the span of only 8 or 9 months. On one hand, that's absolutely insane. Think about what I just said there. I can't even fathom how the team was able to make such a change in such a short time. But on the other, yeah, when you know how last minute the overhaul was in response to the positive feedback of an April Fool's joke of all things, it explains quite a bit. Plus, even coming out on the other side of 2020 as my favorite story of the year, it has possibly the biggest shark jump moment in the entire Yakuza franchise. Something so bad that I swear to God, only this series could pull it off without anybody really questioning it. If you've beaten the game, you'll probably know what I'm talking about. This brings me to the Best Gameplay Award, which this year goes to Spider-Man Miles Morales. In a year full of innovative new game mechanics, where a game like Hades found yet another way to reinvent the roguelike genre to great effect, or where Ghost of Tsushima made you actually pay attention to the game world you're playing in by removing the minimap that we all stare at 24/7, I found that my favorite gameplay experience went to a game that didn't even try to reinvent the wheel. Miles Morales took the hectic combat from Insomniac's first Spider-Man title, fine-tuned it, and then threw in some new wrinkles specific to our second Spidey's new invisibility and bioelectric venom abilities. Sure, I might miss Peter's arsenal of gadgets just a little bit, and that Ratchet & Clank-esque chaos of hot-swapping between them to deal maximum carnage to the baddies, but Miles' charge punch shredding through armored enemies more than makes up for that until the next game. And thankfully, Insomniac mostly addressed the pretty weak stealth sections of the original game by allowing you to actually play stealth for more than just a few minutes before drawing the enemy's aggro and being forced into combat for the entire rest of the encounter. Even the smaller touch-ups in this, the PS5's best launch title, do an amazing job of showing that the team was receptive to feedback. The new Friendly Neighborhood Spider app helps to make random street crimes both a bit more meaningful as slightly longer side quests, and it just cuts back on needing to swing around Manhattan's district waiting for crimes to pop up just so you can cross them off the checklist. Mixing these improvements together with Miles' inexperienced, flailing swinging animations and the haptic trigger feedback when you're soaring through New York as the tension of the web ropes actually pushes back against you, you've got a recipe for a game that you just won't be able to put down for, like, the 6 hours that it lasts. Oops. Spider-Man PS4 was my 2018 Game of the Year for a reason, and it's because it was a spectacularly refined culmination of everything that Insomniac had learned to date, and it was just a damn fun game to play and lose yourself in. Miles Morales takes that and cranks the dial even more, delivering a superior, although shorter, experience. There's a reason I 100% completed this game, actually for real, on launch day, and it's not just that whole the game is short thing, it's because it's so damn fun. And before we move on, I also have to give a huge shout out to a spectacular performance from one particular voice actor this year, somebody who's earning my Breakout Role Award for 2020. It's going to a person who stood out to me through his heartfelt and star-making performances, and, of course, for his ability to capture the exaggerated swagger of a former Yakuza. Ha ha! I got you twice! Get fucked! 2020's breakout performer is KAIJI Tang. This wasn't an award I was even thinking about or planning to include until the last week or so of December, but when wrapping up some of the straggler 2020 games that I hadn't yet finished, I ran into Tang's voice again in 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim, where he also plays an incredibly loyal, lovable oaf that has a weird, sensual, lustrous love of bread. And yet, despite playing two very similar Sega characters essentially in back-to-back months, despite using the exact same voice for both, Tang's performance was strong enough in 13 Sentinels that only occasionally did I think, man, this guy's just Ichiban. Tang's character steals the show in both of these games, and now that he's on my radar, I'm excited to see where the next few years take him. 13 Sentinels also gives me a convenient transition to the next category, it's almost like I wrote it that way, 2020's most overlooked game. Aegis Rim is a masterful blend of classically inspired 2D adventure gameplay and giant robots fighting kaiju in a weird RTS gameplay is really weird. A game whose story was neck and neck with Yakuza 7's for the Best Story Award, thanks to its ability to command 13 different protagonists across several asynchronous periods of time, not only without falling apart, but excelling at telling a story in such an insane manner. And given that it's sold 300,000 copies worldwide as of the start of 2021, it's such an underappreciated game that it would have taken home this award here if this award was for the most underrated or underappreciated game, not the most overlooked one. There's one game that's performed much better than 13 Sentinels, but somehow is going to remain incredibly overlooked for years to come, thanks to the weird zeitgeist that is YouTube and really gaming social media in general. The Golden Bolt's most overlooked game of 2020 is a game that's been oddly, willfully overlooked, and that is Paper Mario: The Origami-King. Despite selling more in its first month or two than the beloved Thousand Year Door did in its entire lifetime, mentioning Origami-King will still cause a heated debate in many circles. Let me say this. Thousand Year Door is easily my favorite Paper Mario game of all time. I spent dozens of hours this year making a video gushing about just one town in the game, and a few months later I played or replayed every Paper Mario game just to make a ranking video that affirmed, yes, it's the best one, but please, just once, shut the fuck up about it. I understand. Truly, I do. It's not the game that Thousand Year Door fans have wanted for the last decade and a half, and yet it's got a strong argument to be the second or third best game in the entire franchise because it goes all in on being a different game. Reviewers, critics, and journalists have realized that and in many cases praised it for being an adventure game and leaning into that while also noting its shortcomings and room for improvement. Fans that didn't hold their nose immediately have realized that, oh, wait, no, yeah, this is okay if it's different actually. I kind of like this. I myself love that this is essentially a friggin' paper Zelda game, and yet there's this weird culture war going on around this game because heavy air quote real fans won't give it a shot on principle, or because their favorite YouTuber doesn't like it and that somehow validates their refusal to play it, or any slew of other reasons to blindly bash something that they have not tried. If you were burned by Sticker Star or by Color Splash, I get it. Sticker Star burned me and I bought that game used for $15 years later knowing it was trash, and I still have burn marks on my hands from holding that damn case. In that case, this is not a game to buy at full price, which makes it awesome that Origami-King has already gone on pretty deep sales for a Nintendo game. The game is a charming, hilarious, at times heartwarming, and others heartbreaking experience that in many ways improves on issues that I've had with games like the first 3 Paper Marios. In others, it falls very short, and at the end of the day, it didn't eclipse the Thousand Year Door for me, not even close, but that's not for a lack of trying. And in the strangest sequence of events for me in 2020, besides all of 2020, it's because of Origami-King that I played another one of my favorite games of the year, and the winner of the Game I Was Most Wrong About award, an award for exactly what I just said. See, if I hadn't thrown in an ad-lib line at the end of my ranking every Paper Mario video and said as a joke that I would rank every Ghost of Tsushima game next, I wouldn't have bought Ghost of Tsushima yet. As somebody who's been a fan of most of Sucker Punch's work, yes, even Rocket Robot on Wheels, and most of you don't even know what that game even is, I remember when Sony executives were reportedly not satisfied whatsoever with this game's early vertical slices, back before we even knew what the game was, just that it was their next thing after Infamous Second Son, you know what? I'll talk about that another day. I remember the trailers and the gameplay showcases just not doing it for me once we did see what Ghost of Tsushima was, showing a game that looked gorgeous but practically traced the lines of the open-world action template. To be fair, that's still kind of what it does. Buried beneath the early, and I mean early, Assassin's Creed combat, zombified and brought back to life for some reason, beneath the hundreds of open-world trinkets and somewhat useless armor sets, and beneath the somewhat slow start, is a game that sums up to far more than its separate parts. Seeing Jin level his samurai training with the dishonorable stealth assassinations, poison, and other tactics that are necessary in the name of saving the people of Tsushima from the Mongol invaders, it's all a simple premise that's been done hundreds of times in film before, but I can't think of a time when this was translated into a game, let alone as well as it has been here. Every secondary character, and even tertiary ones like the villagers driven out by a troop of bandits, they all share that same struggle, and everywhere you go on the island of Tsushima, you feel the overwhelming air of loss with raided caravans, burned corpses. It's a heavy game to be as reductive as possible. And while many seasoned players may be a bit desensitized to that sort of theming, that sort of violence, Ghost of Tsushima's greatest achievement is that it makes you look at every bit of this by throwing away the tried and true minimap. Now obviously, options for limited heads-up displays have been around for years as a sort of challenge pro difficulty gamer move XD, but in Ghost, the wind blows in the direction of your objective to keep you focused on the grass and the leaves and the particle effects around you, and this really forces you to appreciate not only just how good this game looks, but just how awful the Siege of Tsushima has been. Genuine question here, take a moment to think about this. How many times do you really look around and appreciate the landscape in a video game? Either when traveling from objective to objective, or stopping and staring at the sunset, or the mountains, or anything like that. How often do you stop and appreciate it? Probably not all that often, it's just window dressing as you move from mission to mission, despite those landscapes taking years of meticulous work to get to this point. Removing the minimap is a masterful design decision from a game that I just didn't expect to amount to much, a decision that makes you have to look at the game itself, which is such a stupid thing that I have to say, but the decision better pays off all of the work of the artists and the designers, all of the work that they have to put in to make this game feel immersive, feel real, feel powerful, and you have to look at it. Coming back down from my soapbox, because it's pretty high up and I'm starting to get some vertigo, I think my favorite design philosophy used in this game is that Sucker Punch just did not care to make this more than just a really good video game. Easily dozens of times throughout the main story, and even more in side missions, rather than animating Jin getting into, say, an empty sake barrel to prepare for a stealth attack, the game just fades to black, waits a moment, and fades back. For a game that forces you to watch every single time when you die as Jin laboriously crawls across the ground hoping for a second chance before an enemy stabs or beheads you again every single time that you die, this might sound like a weird, conflicting design choice, but it's a case of thinking smarter, not harder, I would say. Nobody at the end of the day needs to have elevators to mask loading times, or games that run from start to finish without a single camera cut, or dynamic heart rates so that characters use slightly different breaths when running during a stressful fight, or anything like that. All of that stuff is awesome, and I love it as a technical showcase, don't get me wrong, but is it worth the extra hours of manpower, the likely crunch that goes into it, only for nobody to notice until Polygon makes an article about it? As somebody whose content rarely has frills, and who utilizes fades to black pretty often rather than spending hours of time on fancy transitions or animations that nobody actually thinks about and that I'm just not artistically talented enough to do, I appreciate that Sucker Punch affirmed this belief of mine that while all of that stuff is nice, most players or viewers or consumers simply aren't going to notice the extra bits of style so long as the substance is as firm as it is here. Here being Ghost of Tsushima, not this trash video. Ghost of Tsushima ends up in this weird territory then as a game that very clearly takes itself seriously and doesn't stray from that gravity, but also a game that'll have some pretty insignificant animation hiccups or companion pathing issues, and just a little bit of jank, which somehow made me appreciate it even more, because it expresses its art and its messages while unabashedly being just a video game. I don't care that the art of haiku didn't exist yet during the Mongol invasion of Japan, or that samurai didn't really use katanas and hulking armor yet during this era. I don't care that the game does those dumb fade-outs all the time. I don't care that the game for some reason doesn't have a lock-on system and just sort of makes you aim in the general direction of enemies and hope that you attack the right one. And I don't care that I'm hiding in obscenely tall grass all the time like in every open-world game of the 8th console generation, because the game doesn't care to be more than just playing a fun game with a simple story that grows stronger and more impactful each mission. And now I can even share in that fun and that not caring by playing the free, janky, weird multiplayer mode that they added in a few months later with bonus Uncle Iroh. Hell yeah! Sidebar, the game that I was most correct about in 2020? Marvel's Avengers. Ouch. Moving on, 2020's Apex Legends of the Year it's Apex Legends. Yet again, this was the game that most often distracted me from working on videos, my comfort food when I didn't feel like turning my brain on after a long day of work or whatever it might be. The game's support has continued throughout the year, as have all the dumb times that I've spent with my buddies. Maybe next year another game will overtake it, but who knows. I've got one more award that I would like to give out before I talk about my Game of the Year, although keep in mind that just about any of the games I've talked about so far could take home the Golden Bolt for 2020. Actually, that sounds like the game's gonna sleep with me. I don't think I want that. Whatever, anyway, I have to artificially create suspense somehow, so don't assume that I haven't mentioned my Game of the Year yet. Except for this game. This is not my Game of the Year for 2020, but it does earn the Best Performances Award for the incredible acting by most of the cast. That award goes to The Last of Us Part 2. I'll talk about the whole not Game of the Year thing in a second, please bear with me, because I have to tap dance around about 1,000 spoilers to get there, so I'm gonna do the easy part first. I really do have to laud Ashley Johnson and Troy Baker reprising their roles as Ellie and Joel respectively, Laura Bailey as Abby, Ian Alexander as Lev, and Well, not the entire rest of the cast, but at least some of them. Again, I'll get there in a second. The Last of Us 2 did exactly what I wanted it to in some respects, addressing brutally and emotionally the fallout of Joel's decision at the end of the first game. The main cast just lays it all out in every scene, and you can feel them pulling from every prior experience in their actual lives to find the energy for scenes of grief, unbelievable anger, despair, bitterness, and maybe even a bit of happiness once or twice. Maybe. Even some of the secondary characters completely blew me away, both thanks to their voice performances and the astounding job of the technicians behind the scenes capturing and depicting accurate face models from those characters' likenesses. Like, did you know that Dina is voiced and mocapped by a completely different person than the person who modeled her face? I didn't until just now, but that's just amazing to me. And Shannon Woodward's performance as Dina, that's the actor, not the reference model, made me really want to see her character be more than just Ellie's cheerleader that doesn't do much for most of the adventure. Which brings me to part of the reason The Last of Us 2 is not my game of the year. I have quite a few reasons, but maybe I'll save that for another video down the road when the discourse on this game isn't so toxic and when I would feel more comfortable just throwing heaving spoilers at you. The short version that I'm sure somebody else has said well before me, because I didn't really play this game for a few months, is that I think this game says a lot without having a lot to say. The performances, again, mostly stellar, but outside of a few characters, things don't come close to the growth of Joel and Ellie from the first game, so we end up with well-acted but rather flat characters. I think that the game's pacing is baffling, and while I'm not going to sit here and arrogantly say, oh, I think I could structure this game better, I certainly feel like there was a stronger play order to this game's chapters. Many of the emotional beats just don't hit nearly as well to me when they're shoved in your face so suddenly after a previous chapter, or previous events that again I cannot talk about. And that's a shame because the more implicit ones hit far better than I thought they would. Seeing the dichotomy between the protagonists and how they move and how they think would have been far better served in a more interweaved narrative structure rather than by telling some Sonic Adventure 2 light and dark story where both sides are just gray because nobody is good or evil in The Last of Us and they're just people. I know. At least this game finally explored that theme that the first game was hyped and marketed around but never delivered on, but it's 7 years too late. It's just fascinating to me that the characters in Ellie's group are so incredibly well acted, those like Dina, but end up not really having much to work with, while Abby's group tend to have a bit more to chew on narratively but are acted just really poorly at times. I'm sorry. From its narrative structure to its gameplay pacing, it's sadly, to me, an uneven game, and uneven does not hold up to the incredible standard from a studio who, until recent reports came out, was widely considered by most the best developer in the entire industry. And I'm saying this after talking about how Ghost of Tsushima was just a game and that made all of its stupid shit awesome, I know, but that's by design. Not every game can be held to that same standard. I did not have high expectations for Ghost, and that was to its benefit, but then I didn't have the expectations for The Last of Us 2 that everybody did either, and while it exceeded those expectations in most senses, I didn't expect such a technical masterpiece of a game to be oh so messy. And you know what? That's fine. It's the other side of the coin that was The Last of Us Part 1, a game that director Neil Druckmann said himself was a disaster up until a few weeks before release, a game that nobody at the studio was sure would come together in the way that they hoped before it did. Where that game stuck the landing, Part 2, in my opinion, stumbled. And again, that's fine. Expectations is going to be a theme one more time here with my 2020 Game of the Year. It's a game that for years I was so confident would be a mess, a game that in no world I could see myself getting sucked into because of the baggage that I knew that would come with. My Game of the Year is a game that proved me wrong and sucked me in and got me excited despite every nerve in my body screaming not to fall for it even today. My Game of the Year is Final Fantasy VII Remake. At some point before release, I came around on this particular game. I started to realize that this first part should turn out fine, but that there was no feasible way in my mind that Part 2 onward could turn out well by the very nature of its development. Things like the promised save transfer from parts 1 to 2 and beyond, despite part 2 alone being years, maybe half a decade, and certainly an entire console generation off. Things like, how the hell do you spend 40 hours expanding the first 5 hours of the original Final Fantasy VII and then not expect part 2 to just speed through the subsequent 10 to 20 hours to get things over with? Things like, they didn't even have part 2's plot finalized at the time of the first part's release, and I believe it wasn't even finalized until months after I played the first part, which, oh my god, I could not see how they would make a faithful remake work across multiple games, across multiple consoles. And, of course, I'm an idiot because I should have known that they weren't going to make a faithful remake, a simple expansion of the story that millions of us played 23 years ago, the story that has in many ways defined so many of the stories that have come since in this industry. Final Fantasy VII is a self-aware remake, one that challenges the core of what the original game was, and while if you look online that's absolutely pissed off a small but very loud sect of Final Fantasy VII diehards that just wanted the exact same game but not ugly, I think that this was the right call because it's a game that doesn't just redefine Final Fantasy VII and thus justify its own existence, it's a game that redefines remakes like Resident Evil 2 Remake started to do before it. In a medium where we're often given the agency to change and decide our characters' fates, why can't we try and change the fate that we've known in this universe? It's ridiculous, it's stupid, it's genius, and that's what's gotten me, against all odds, against my better judgment, even though I'm still confident that somehow this whole project will turn out to be a disaster, that's what's gotten me excited to see where the rest of this new Final Fantasy VII saga goes. For some further context, I've never been a Final Fantasy VII guy. Many of you will recall from my Legend of Dragoon retrospective that was more or less the first JRPG I sunk myself into, and that was in 2013, the same year the fucking Last of Us came out. I was a very late entrant into the genre in earnest, and while I've since played Final Fantasy VII and appreciated the game that it is more than I thought I would, it's not exactly the game for me thanks to its age. So for this remake to not only shift genres into a fantastic hybrid of the classic Final Fantasy ATB gameplay and that action hacky slashy Final Fantasy 15 style that showed a ton of promise, but for it to also take side characters that just kind of existed before and make you care about them, make you tear up over them, for it to make you unsure of what's fair game as you play both this and future parts of this remake, and to make you wonder how they'll keep you on your toes when it comes to the single biggest spoiler in video game history, the Luke I am your father moment of gaming, it's got me not only intrigued, not only invested, but even rooting for this game to pull it off, to prove my gut wrong. Final Fantasy VII Remake isn't some bastardization of one of the seminal role-playing games, it's a lovingly crafted recreation, retelling, and subversion of that game from so many of the same people that made the original so compelling, accompanied by new staffers that were no doubt inspired to get into game development because of that original. A straight remake wouldn't have been enthralling, but this is. It's a way for both newcomers and longtime fans alike to experience the magic of Final Fantasy VII anew, to question whether your memories of this game are still as sharp as they were decades ago, or whether those memories can be false. If you know anything about Final Fantasy VII, that last part should be screaming in your mind right now. I say again, it's ridiculous, it's stupid, it's genius, and it's my 2020 Game of the Year. Thanks for watching.